Welcome to Microsoft Flight Simulator and a reopened and reimagined Horace Williams Airport in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. In this video, we're going to talk about the infrastructure available at the airport, improvements and changes that can be made to the facility, obstacle clearance over the development to the east side of the airport called Aura Chapel Hill, and traffic pattern and noise abatement procedures. Now, a disclaimer when it comes to talking about the infrastructure at the airport, that all the buildings, especially the hangars, will need to be structurally inspected to make sure that they can still serve their purpose at the reopened airport. For the sake of this video, we're going to assume that all existing structures are still usable. Let's talk about the parking lot. Currently, we have a gravel parking lot that can hold approximately 25 to 30 cars and can be paved if so desired. Starting off to the southeast portion of the airport, we have a World War II era enclosed single-place T-hangar. This structure once housed a maintenance shop as well as flying club offices. Up against the trees we have 4 open T-hangars. Next to that we have the original 1941 metal hangar that can house several airplanes inside. And this structure could potentially be listed as a historic building in North Carolina, as it was around during the airport's tenure as a Navy training facility in World War II. Next to that, we have the main ramp area for transient aircraft. Adjacent to that, we have 2 fuel pumps, one for Jet A and the other for 100 low-lead gasoline. Next to the parking lot, we have this Carolina Blue administration building. It consists of a bench for people to come and just watch the airplanes come and go, a lounge area for people to take a break between their flights, the office for the airport manager, and an office for the line guys who observe and manage airport operations. Next to that, we have a trailer structure that can be used for offices. This is where the UNC Air Operations had their offices for several years. Between those buildings, we have the airport beacon light that can be used for night and IFR operations. Besides that, we have a medium-sized open hangar for 2 airplanes. And besides that, we have a large hangar here that once housed UNC Air Operations and can host UNC Air Operations again, as proven by the fact that TBM aircraft fit in this hangar, which is the aircraft that they fly currently. This structure consists of a lounge area, a storage facility, a shower, as well as the space for the aircraft. This would be a much more convenient facility for UNC Air Operations, their clients, the doctors that they transport, especially in the case that their current lease at RDU does not get extended. In its current state, the airport has 24 tie-down spots for transient aircraft and for tenants who don't want to pay for a hangar. However, for those who do want to pay for a hangar, here's where some of the changes come into play. In this rendering, you can see we've added 4 medium-sized hangars. These hangars would not only increase the airport's value and increase the airport's revenue, they would pay for themselves almost instantly. When the airport closed in 2018, there was a waiting list of over 30 pilots. Hangar space is currently extremely limited at surrounding airports, and this would be an incredibly convenient place for a person who wants to base their aircraft at a general aviation airport in the Research Triangle area. These hangars also represent a compromise between 2 plans at this property. The first being reopen the airport, and the second to be install a solar farm in the grassy area. In this rendering, you can see that we've installed solar panels on the roofs of the hangars. Not only will the reopened Horace Williams Airport be able to be marketed as a green airport, these solar panels can help power lights, fans, power outlets inside of the hangars. Last piece of infrastructure to talk about is the weather station, which was located out in this vicinity here. That could be easily reinstalled in the location that it was, and the hangars don't provide any risk of deflecting wind towards the weather station to produce an inaccurate result. Let's talk about the runway. The runway, when the airport closed, was 4,000 feet long. This taxiway entrance was the only way to get onto and off the runway. When the airport closed, the runway extended approximately 400 feet to the east. In this rendering, we have those 400 feet replaced with grass. Of that 4,000 feet, included a 700-foot displaced threshold due to the 100-foot tall trees on the other side of MLK Jr. Boulevard, which we will discuss in a bit. In this rendering, we've eliminated the displaced threshold, meaning that landing on runway 27, you gain 300 feet of landing distance. Landing on runway 9, you lose 400 feet of landing distance. In this rendering, the new runway length is 3,600 feet. We chose that number for several reasons. 1, it helps reduce repaving costs by 10%. 2, it's in line with other university airports, like the University of Michigan Airport in Ann Arbor, which has a 3,500-foot runway. 3rd, this is a compromise with nearby residents. When the runway was extended from 3,500 feet to 4,000 feet in 1990, that extension brought about lots of controversy, as the extension of the runway brought up with it the possibility of larger, louder airplanes. By reducing the runway by 10%, we're telling our nearby communities that we care about them, we care about their quality of life, and we are reducing the possibility and capability of larger, louder airplanes coming into this airport. It also conveniently puts the eastern end of the runway perfectly in line with the existing taxiway entrance. Speaking of taxiways, this rendering also includes a parallel taxiway. There are several advantages to a parallel taxiway. First, it makes the runway more efficient. Second, it makes the runway safer, because if you have someone landing on runway 27, in order to park, they have to do a 180-degree maneuver on the runway, back taxi down the runway, so you have an airplane on the runway for longer periods of time, and increasing the possibility of a runway incursion. Not only does it make the runway safer and more efficient, but it also makes the runway quieter. This residential area on the bottom of the screen was built in the early 90s, and some of those houses are a mere 500 feet from the runway. Previously, if the wind favored runway 9, an airplane would have to enter the runway from the east side, taxi down the runway, and do a tight 180-degree maneuver on the west end of the runway to get into position for takeoff. That maneuver requires lots of power to turn the airplane around on a tight, not very wide surface. And that maneuver creates lots of noise. By introducing a parallel taxiway, the airplanes can quietly taxi along, with a conventional entrance onto the runway, and take off and get out of there. So you're reducing the noise in half for these residents, because they only have to deal with the takeoff noise, not the turnaround noise and then the takeoff noise. Let's talk about this new development, Aura Chapel Hill, as modeled here in the flight simulator. Looking at the blueprint plans for the structures, all the buildings will be approximately 50 feet tall. For comparison, the trees that used to be here were 100 feet tall. This is partly why we can eliminate the displaced threshold on the new 3,600-foot runway. For airplanes landing on runway 27, this will be the view coming over Aura Chapel Hill. We're on a 4-degree glide slope, which is what the glide slope was previously, and you can see that the center line of the runway actually does not put airplanes directly over any buildings, which is good. Let's talk about obstacle clearance over this development for landing aircraft. Prior to 2018 and the airport's closure, this is what the obstacle clearance profile looked like for aircraft landing on runway 27. With the 700-foot displaced threshold, the 1,000-foot marks, aka our touchdown zone, were 1,390 feet from the end of the runway. On a 4-degree glide slope, we go past a 1,100-foot runoff area, plot of 60-foot tall trees, MLK Jr. Boulevard, and the 100-foot tall trees. Now, this diagram is to scale. What you can also notice is there is a slight downhill gradient from the touchdown zone, which is approximately 495 feet above sea level. The closest tree is 470 feet, and the trees at the back of the property are 460 feet. On a 4-degree glide slope, we clear the closest tree by 120 feet, and the tree at the back of the property by 185 feet. At our reopened airport, this is our obstacle clearance profile. Now that we push our threshold 300 feet back from the end of the runway to the 1,000-foot marks is 1,090 feet, although the touchdown zone elevation remains the same. On a 4-degree glide slope, we now clear the apartment buildings, which are half the height of the trees. We clear the closest building by 150 feet, 3 times the height of the building, and the building in the back of the property by 215 feet. This is a 30-foot increase on each end. That is approximately the wingspan of an airplane. Now here is an image of a Piper Archer flying over or at Chapel Hill. Piper Archer is an airplane that would be seen commonly at an airport like Horace Williams. And in this picture, this represents the clearance that we had over the 100-foot tall trees. With that extra 30-foot buffer, we would be clearing these buildings by this amount. This is what it would look like on a 4-degree glide slope. And again, it may not look like it in the picture, but we are clearing those buildings by 3 times the height of the building, and we're not even directly over a building. We're coming straight over that parking area, that little clearing between the buildings. We're going to talk about noise abatement procedures, especially when it comes to the pattern. Right now we're on runway 27 in a Piper Archer. Now you notice our altimeter showing 500 feet. That is the elevation of the airport. And traffic patterns are conventionally flown at 1,000 feet above the ground. So we're going to go up to 1,500 feet. There's 60 knots. We're going to rotate. Let the airplane accelerate to 80 knots, which is approximately our best rate of climb speed. Right now we're on what's called the upwind leg. That is the leg that is straight off the runway. And the next thing we're going to do is there's going to be a right 90-degree turn onto what's called the crosswind leg. Now the crosswind leg is typically performed once you get to 700 feet above the ground, which would be 1,200 feet, right about here. Now here's the problem with doing that this way. If you look right now, we're about 700 to 800 feet above the ground. We're full power, in a turn, and we're above a neighborhood. Well, not very friendly to our neighbors. We're now back on runway 27, and let's try a modified departure procedure. So we're going to do the same exact thing we did, runway 27, accelerating to 60 knots. 60 knots, come off the ground, let the airplane accelerate to 80. Now what we're going to do this time is instead of turning crosswind at 700 feet above the ground, or 1,200 feet indicated, we're going to continue this upwind leg until pattern altitude, till 1,500 feet. What that does is it takes us away from the neighborhood, and it allows us to reduce the power and get higher before flying over that neighborhood. See, here is 1,200 feet. If we turned now, that turn would put us over this neighborhood. See, now we've leveled off at 1,500 feet. We're reducing the power. And you can see now that we're turning way out here, there's more fields, the density is less. And while ultimately we are flying over some houses, we're 300 feet higher than we would be otherwise, and we've reduced the power drastically than we would be otherwise. That's what I suggest on the 27 end. Now let's talk about the departure procedure off runway 9. The biggest obstacle when it comes to noise abatement is the development across the street. It is our responsibility as pilots to make sure that we mitigate noise for those neighbors. Here would be a typical departure off runway 9. Rotate, we'll let the airplane accelerate to 80 knots for our climb out speed. And we're going to maintain a conventional upwind straight off the runway. Now as we cross the street, you will see this is clearly a problem because we are directly over the development, full power, and we're overflying at about 900 feet, 400 feet off the ground, full power, and clearly that is not a very friendly maneuver. So we need to find an alternate solution. So we'll try this again off runway 9, but this time what we're going to do is when we get to 600 feet, 100 feet off the ground, we're going to do a right turn to a heading of 110 degrees. That's a 20-degree right turn. I've tested this with multiple different types of aircraft. We have the obstacle clearance for this. By the time you get to the trees, you'll be well above that. There's the 600 feet. We're going to begin the right turn, and what you see is that it clearly has us flying away from the development, away from the residential areas to the north, and instead we fly over the YMCA, which is not a residential area. We don't fly over Aura Chapel Hill at all. So that is the noise abatement procedure for runway 9, and I've tested it with 5 different types of airplanes, measuring the noise reduction from the Aura Chapel Hill development, and doing this will cause a noise reduction of 10 to 20%. Traditionally, the traffic pattern for both runways had put the downwind leg on the north side of the airport. In this video, we're going to explore other options. We're going to start off with the traditional right-hand traffic pattern for runway 27, and we're going to incorporate the noise abatement procedure that we came up with in the previous video. 60 knots, rotate. Now we are leveling off the airplane. You can hear the power coming back. And now we're making our crosswind turn. You can see big open fields over here. Level the wings for a second, check for traffic in both directions, and then we turn downwind. And our landmark out the nose is the high school. Now as pilots, we generally like to gauge where the runway is in terms of looking down the wing, where the runway bisects the wing. Typically about 2/3 down the wing is a good, what we call sight picture. You can see right here that runway is pretty much exactly 2/3 down the wing. In this vicinity, once we're past the high school, we're over the Carolina North Forest. Then we start approaching the residence again. The good news is, as you can hear right there, we started throttling back. Once we get a beam the far end of the runway, that's when we pull the power back, we start putting in the flaps, slowing down the airplane and beginning our descent down towards the runway. In this quadrant, there are a fair amount of residents under this patch of trees, but again, we're at a much more reduced power setting, and our noise footprint would not be exaggerated very much in this area. Now we're turning what's called our base leg, which is parallel to the crosswind leg, putting down our flaps, slowing down the airplane. And now we're going to fly over Aura Chapel Hill. On our final leg, we're now at 70 knots. You can see those 2 lights to the right side of the runway. One is red, one is white. That means we're on the proper glide path down to the runway. In this case, it's a 4-degree glide slope, which puts us 150 feet above the closest building of Aura Chapel Hill. And we're coming in for a nice touchdown. That's what we call a greaser. The next pattern we're going to demonstrate is the traditional left traffic pattern for runway 9, also incorporating the noise abatement procedure off of runway 9. Rotating at 60 knots, letting the airplane accelerate. And once we get to 600 feet, we're going to start that right turn to a heading of 110 degrees. You can see the development off the left side. We're not overflying it, reducing our noise footprint by 10 to 20%, avoiding the schools. The next landmark is the lake off the left side. Once we find ourselves abeam the lake, then we'll turn left and begin our crosswind leg before we reach all the malls. 1,500 feet, lower the nose, reduce the power, and immediately the airplane becomes much quieter. Now we begin our downwind leg. And we're going to use the high school once again as our landmark of how far away to be from the runway. You can see campus just off the left wingtip, again highlighting the convenience of this airport to downtown Chapel Hill. Now the good thing about this traffic pattern is as we're flying over the high school and the neighborhood right after that, the high school is just abeam the end of the runway, which is where we begin to power down the engine, which you can hear right there. So just before we get to the neighborhoods, we start slowing the airplane down, reducing the noise, start putting in the flaps, start our downwind to base turn. There are some houses here, but again, we have like 25% power at this point, so we're not that loud at all. From base to final, at this point, there's very few developments. We're back above the Carolina North Forest. So there are pros and cons to flying on the north side of the airport. There are some developments, but we have the lake, we have the forest to help buffer the sound. Now we're going to try some unconventional traffic patterns that were not flown before in the airport's history. We're just taking off runway 27. We're going to do a left traffic pattern. We're still going to abide by our noise abatement procedure, so we're going to climb up to 1,500 feet before turning left. Carolina North Forest. The only people we're bothering with our noise are some hikers and the squirrels. Leveling 1,500 feet, reducing the power. And now we're turning left over a school out here. Now, if you look at a map of Chapel Hill, a satellite map of Chapel Hill, you'll see that on the south side of the airport, there appear to be more residential areas, more houses than on the north side. Why would we fly over more houses? Well, if you look at who are in these houses, a lot of the houses on the south side of the airport is student housing, or housing that is rented by students. It's not permanent residents who have to live with this noise every day. There are two options. You can either have the traffic pattern for both runways on the south side, or you could split it up. For one runway, have it on the north side, on one runway, have it on the south side. That way you're distributing the noise footprint and not putting all the load on one part of the population. You can see out the right wing, many more houses. You can see campuses right there. If anything, having the traffic pattern on the south side reminds people that this is indeed a university airport that is convenient to the university. We're abeam the runway, powering down one notch of flaps. Lots of houses down here, lots of apartments, but that's exactly what they are, apartments. People that live here from August to May. It looks like it's more densely populated, and it is. But the politics are a little bit different. 20-year-old college students renting an apartment are not the demographic of the people that would likely complain about the noise. They're the people who are going to buy cars and modify the exhaust to make it louder anyway, so they don't mind noise. Here's another look of the approach coming over Aura Chapel Hill. We're on our glide path of 4 degrees. Lastly, we're going to try a right-hand traffic pattern for runway 9. Again, observing our noise abatement procedures. Climbing straight to 600 feet. Upon reaching 600 feet, right turn to 110 degrees. Here comes the turn. And here's what this turn looks like from the roof of an Aura Chapel Hill building. Turning away from the development. Reducing our noise footprint. Now, because this turn to the right cuts into our crosswind leg a little bit, we're just going to turn at 1,200 feet. Because of that offset, we're basically going to do one big turn from the upwind leg into the downwind leg. Beautiful view of the airport out the right side. Beautiful view of campus out the left side. All right, there's a beam the end of the runway. But again, at this point in the traffic pattern, we've reduced our power. Instead of 50% power, we're at 25% power coming down towards the runway. On this end, we're keeping our turn inside of the school over there. And at this point, we're back over the Carolina North Forest. Back on our 4-degree glide slope. And so those are the four options for traffic patterns at the reopened Horace Williams Airport. We can either keep the pattern as it was on the north side with some added noise abatement procedures. We can put it on the south side with the noise abatement procedures, or we can mix and match, assign one runway to the north and assign one runway to the south.